Call to order, Builders and Grounds. Can I get a roll call, please?
Member Gately? Absent. Member Castellanos?
Present.
Member Capola?
Present.
We have on the agenda space for Lynn Community Health Center at Pickering. I want to refer to, I believe, the superintendent, Dr. Alvarez, to run this by us.
Good evening, everyone. So there's a need for space, and I'll have Deputy Superintendent Ruggiero elaborate a little bit, but there is a need for space for students to have the support and services. And there was a meeting over the summer and a walk with ISD to make sure that that space in the locker room could be subdivided to provide appropriate office space. And so I'll turn it over to Deputy Ruggiero to discuss further what our plans are to do next.
Good evening, everyone. So Principal Ritterhouse has been asking for numerous years now for a community health center to be at Pickering. And so this year, the Community Health Center, Lynn Community Health Center, was able to secure funding to provide construction to put in some behavioral health offices to provide some behavioral health supports at Pickering. And so we did go on a tour of the building. Principal Ritterhouse had identified a spot. The locker rooms, one of the locker rooms, both locker rooms are really good size spaces. And so one of them he identified, and we easily can secure 2 offices on one end of it while still maintaining the remaining space for use as locker rooms. I was told over the summer by Mike Donovan that anytime we are repurposing space in a school, it needs to come forward to the school committee. And so as a result, this is why we're bringing it up. Again, the funding is secured. They have funding to support this. The school is all on board to have it. They definitely feel they can utilize this service, and it would definitely benefit our kids and our students. I mean, our kids and our families, sorry. So we're just looking for approval.
I just have a quick question. So for the funding, they're gonna fully fund that portion of the build out? Are they gonna, so all the I guess office equipment, anything that goes into it?
Correct.
They'll fund it?
Yep.
What's gonna be the employee count there? I'm just thinking about parking, like how that's gonna be.
It's 2 offices, so it's 2 clinicians.
Okay. 2 clinicians. Any questions?
No, I'm going to make a motion. Make a motion that the space for Lynn Community Health Center at Pickering be approved to repurpose and move to the full committee.
Second.
Member Gately? Absent. Member Castellanos?
Yes.
Member Capola?
Yes. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Member Gately? Absent. Member Castellanos?
Yes.
Member Capola?
Yes.
Very good, thanks. You ready for open mic? Sure. Yeah, all right. The open mic session is designed to provide an opportunity for citizens to express their views on matters of concern to the school committee. The sessions are not designed to encourage debate or lengthy exchange of views, but are to have the committee understand numerous points of view. The committee would appreciate speakers keeping their presentation to 3 minutes in order to accommodate as many people as time permits. The chair reserves the right to limit the number of speakers on the same topic to 3. All speakers must be at least 18 years of age or enrolled in high school in the Lynn Public Schools District and having discussed their views with a student government representative. The chair reserves the right to rule the speaker out of order if they feel that the speaker's comments are personal in nature, if a speaker's comments are directed at a school committee member or a member of school administration in attendance. That member, through the chair, may address the individual. The session will promptly commence 15 minutes prior to the start of the regular school committee meeting. Anyone wishing to speak at open mic? Anyone for open mic? Last call for open mic. Okay. Close open mic. And we will call to order the 14th regular meeting of the school committee. Roll call, please.
Member Castellanos?
Present.
Member Capola?
Present.
Member Dugan?
Present.
Member Gately? Absent. Member Magnolia?
Present.
Member Pena?
Present.
Mayor Nicholson?
Present. All please rise for a salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance. Thank you. Next item is the minutes.
Make a motion to accept the 13th regular meeting on September 14th, 2023.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Appointments.
Appointments this evening, we're thrilled to have two new assistant directors in the curriculum and instruction team. One is an interim assistant director of math, Aaron Zukowski. Want to stand up so we can recognize you? Congratulations.
Hey, Aaron. Congratulations.
And we also have Assistant Director of World Languages, Sharon Gallagher. And I don't think she's with us tonight, but I hope she's watching. That concludes the appointments.
Congratulations to both. Next item is presentations, starting with MCAS data.
Hello, everyone. I am Jennifer Shorter, new Executive Director of Data Assessment and Accountability. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first time officially in front of you. I did
Welcome.
attend the meeting the last meeting. So I want to start our session really by emphasizing what the hope and expectation is as we walk into this work and this journey together of not just sharing data, but that we're engaging in it to set the right direction for our district. And so I personally feel this responsibility, right, to not just share data, but use it to guide our work as we work towards improvement for our kids and for our educators. To be able to make those well-informed decisions. So today's presentation, I'm going to start with a little level setting to make sure that we start on the same foot with a shared understanding. There have been a lot of changes over the past couple of years, and just to call out one, this is the first year that we've went back to the full accountability framework since 2019. So I'm going to walk us through basically the framework first before we get into the data to make sure that when you look at the data, you understand what you're looking at. Is that?
Sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Oscar. So when thinking about as we're setting this data culture, as well as shaping our mindset around it. So before we even dive into the framework, I just want to frame our minds around a few key points. So starting with these principles in mind, that data is a roadmap. It's not just a snapshot about where we've been, it's also a roadmap to help us to understand what our strengths are, what our opportunities are, and again, of where we're headed. Thinking of it as a collective effort, that this isn't just something that teachers or principals own. We all own this data, and we're in this together. But again, that we're not just presenting data, that we're engaging with it, that we're using it to inform decisions. But also, it's a way that we do get towards equity and excellence for all of our children, making sure that we're serving all our kids correctly. And then finally, we can't just stop at reflecting on what we did. We have to take action. So again, as we're shaping that mindset around what is data really intended to do, I do want us to keep those things in mind. So today, again, we're going to talk about the DESI accountability framework and any relevant updates. We're going to look at some of the district level data and preview some next steps that we do have for schools and the district. So just starting with what the framework is, maybe I call it a 101, like your freshman class 101, what is in the framework? And so it consists of two primary components. We have a normative component, which is that accountability piece. And this slide might look small, but on the next slides, I'll enlarge some of the information. And then we also have the criterion reference. So the normative component measures the performance of all students in a school compared to other schools in the state. So it's not just a comparison within Lynn Public Schools, we're being compared against other kids in the state as well. It provides a snapshot of how our schools' performance ranks relative to others in the state. This is reported as a percentile from 1 to 99. So in essence, it just helps us understand how we are stacking up against the rest of the state. The second part is the criterion reference component. On the other hand, is really all about measuring how we are performing as a district or as a school towards improvement targets that are set by the state. It assesses our performance on very specific indicators that, again, really just helps us track our journey towards improvement. So again, just calling out one of the changes for 2023. This year represents a significant year because, again, it is the first time since 2019 that we returned to the full accountability framework. And we're going to get into like how is that different, of why we should or should not compare different years, because those calculations have changed and what factors are in those calculations have also changed. So if you went to DESE's website, which by the way is closed for maintenance right now, so we can't access it until after 9:30 if anybody is happy to stay that late. We can, but we can't access that right now. There's a couple of different things that report includes. It includes performance of the lowest performing groups, progress towards improvement targets that are set by the state, school and student percentiles, and we're going to talk about the district doesn't get a percentile like the school does. Overall classifications, and we're going to dive into those, and then also schools of recognition. So here's just a map of what was reported in the past 5 years. And so again, if you look at 2019 to the far left, you see that we received the accountability percentile and the progress towards targets. In 2020 and 2021, because of COVID, we didn't get any. And then in 2022, we only got the accountability percentile. And this year, we're back at what we saw in 2019, which includes both progress towards targets and the accountability percentile. You guys may be familiar with these, so I'm not going to read them all, but these are those indicators that I was talking about that had different weightings over the years, may or may not have been included. And so I'm just going to call out a couple of specific ones. High school completion. High school completion has 3 components within it: that 4-year graduation rate, the 5-year graduation rate, and in addition to it, annual dropout rate. So there's things that you might only see it rolled up as one way, but when you comb it out, it's a lot of additional indicators. And then also, I do want to call out as well, our accountability framework as of now does not include the current data for high schools. And so the state is going to update that next month, and you'll get a deeper dive of a presentation with our full accountability data. But it's currently calculated, if you were able to go to the website, it's calculated with graduation data for 21-22. And that's because there are some students that take courses over the summer that allows them to graduate, and so DESE is still calculating those numbers. So if you are looking at graduation data on the website, it is not representative of 22-23. So this accountability percentile, what does that number actually mean? So again, that accountability percentile is 1 to 99, and it compares schools, remember, across the state, but also within groups. And so what it does is it compares non-high schools, and DESE uses the language of non-high schools, which is your elementary and middle schools, with other elementary and middle schools across the state. And so It compares middle, high, and K-12 schools with those same groups of schools. So while they are comparing us across the state, there are groups within those that are being compared. So if you were looking at an elementary school, you couldn't necessarily fairly compare it to the way a high school performed. It's also used sorry, to identify the lowest performing schools in the state as required by state and federal laws. And those same calculations are used to identify low performing student groups. But when we look at that framework as well, you'll also notice that low performing student groups is only reported at the non-high school level. And one of the things that I do want to call out as well that impacts some of the changes that you'll see with schools is that the weighting has changed from 2022, where achievement may have been weighted at 40%. It is weighted now at 60% because we're back to the full model. And so again, of thinking about rankings, how that 20% changes where school falls within other schools across the state. So just a few notes about comparisons again. So we're not comparing 2023 data to any data from 2012 to 2017. That's from DESE. Again, of even thinking about pre-COVID and how the framework has changed. Even the testing of the next gen is different. So you can't really compare the way that it's scored, the types of items on MCAS, because there were some shifts in even testing in itself. Use caution when comparing 18, 19, 22, and 23. Percentiles, again, weren't calculated in 20 and 21, but then also thinking about some of those things that are not reported, but we do know that, take for instance, third graders. They started in the third grade, those kids, that first year in school was virtual. And so that is an unusual group of students. And so when we're looking at that third grade performance, of taking that into consideration of what their learning experience was like. So the second part of data is all the color coding, the different weights. This is what they call the criterion reference component targets. So this slide just explains the key components of the criterion referenced, which includes those federal requirements for long-term goals and interim progress measures. It mentions how DESE calculates targets for districts, schools, and student groups, and how these targets are determined based on various paths as well. And then you also have targets, again, for those non-assessment things like chronic absenteeism as well. And the overall percentage or overall progress is actually calculated as a percentage. So you'll see a scale in each of those different components that we talked about on a scale of 0 to 4. 0 means that we declined in that area, whereas 1 means no change, and then all the way up to 4 is exceeded. So if you saw that it was at 50%, that means that that school or that student group improved, but they improved below the target that was set by DESE. So as we look at what that criterion reference component is, these are the different criteria reference components where you see the possible the points earned, and this is not necessarily our data, this is a sample. We're still just looking at sample. You see the points earned, the total possible points, and what that weight is. And then over to the right, where you calculate the lowest performer, which is only done for elementary and middle schools. So again, the lowest performing student group will measure in each school only for the elementary and middle school, with an exception in 2023. There is no lowest performing group in grade 10. So again, when you go to the website, you're just going to see dashes for that because it's not reported for 10th grade in 2023. And it also only counts eligible students as well. And so for some schools particularly, you may not see any data. And so take, for instance, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass only had 9th grade last year, so they didn't have a tested grade. And so it also depends on the count. If there were less than 10 students in a group, to maintain that anonymity confidentiality, they don't report on that as well. So there might be, let's say, a population, a group of students at that school. It might be 8 black students at that school, but there'll be a blank because they fall below that threshold and it's not publicly released, although the district does have access to see how they performed. And this is just showing how the high school would look. You see the data on the left, but you see no data on the right because that lowest group was not reported in 2023. So we're going to talk about categorization of schools versus categorization of districts. So on this slide is basically an overview of those key factors, which plays into the role of assessing the school's performance. Again, we've talked about that accountability percentile of 1 to 99. A higher percentile indicates stronger performance. That criterion reference percentage, 0 to 100%, measures the school's progress in meeting specific academic targets, which is one of the critical components of the accountability framework. And then you look at the student group performance, which is 1 to 99, graduation rate, but also assessment participation as well. Assessment participation is not just looked at as an overall, but they do also break it out by student groups as well, as more so as we think about equity, equitable access, and understanding all of our students' needs. Categorization of schools. So here is a spectrum from left with the highest designation of schools of recognition. And then you see on the left-hand side as well, those are the designations of schools that are not requiring assistance or intervention. And we talked about those numbers at the bottom already. And then on the right, you have 2 categories, focused and target support and broad comprehensive support. Those are schools that are requiring assistance or intervention. So similarly, but not exactly the same, districts also get a categorization as well. Districts are evaluated, unlike schools, as a single entity. It's kind of like one big school. This means that the district-wide performance is assessed holistically, and the percentiles are not calculated, again, like they are for the individual schools. So remember that 1 to 99, how you're ranking against other schools in the state? They don't do that at the district level, rank us against other districts in the state, only at the school level. Actually, just can you go back 1 slide? So again, the chart, please. Sorry. So again, these are the categorizations of districts. There's one missing that we had for schools. Does anybody know which one that was that doesn't apply to districts? So the one category that schools have is the
Schools of recognition.
schools of recognition. That category does not apply for districts. So just a quick pulse check. Anybody? What is different about the accountability framework for 2023, this school year data that we're about to look at? This is the first time since 2019 that we have the full framework. Is it okay to compare 2023 to 2012 to 2017?
No.
No. And the weightings for accountability indicators are the same in 2022 and 2023. Is that true or false?
That's false.
That's false. Okay, you guys passed. Does anyone have any clarifying questions before we start to look at the district data? Yes.
Dr. Shorter, could you just explain your role to the public for us, please? Like, the Office of Data Assessment and Accountability is fairly new, so it would be important to kind of discuss your role and what this is all about.
Absolutely. And so it's really about doing what's best for kids and letting the data tell us that. And so having a team that can really work towards driving that and having a clear understanding of what the data means and setting up systems. And so even us, yes, we look at the MCAS data, but we're also taking deeper dives to understand of thinking about how do we help support schools in making instructional decisions? And so of thinking about some of the work that our schools have been doing in previous years is a lot of work to be doing at the school level that this team can pull back and do it consistently across schools. And so instead of just an example of when you get your raw scores from the state schools have access to grab them. And so some of the items have different counts available. So some are worth 1 point, one is worth 8 points. And so in a scurry, one school might look and be like, oh my gosh, we did really well on this, but actually you have to do that proportionally. And are all of our schools doing that? So again, pulling that task, that operational task back from schools and giving them the data in a way that allows them to inform instructional decisions. So I can look at data and say, actually, at XYZ school, 10 kids were within 5 points of meeting expectations. And so when I talk to that principal, that conversation looks different from me giving him his raw scores, her or him his raw scores. And so the conversation then begins at that point. Since this is the point that we're starting a conversation at, we can talk about who are those 10 kids? Whose class are they in? What were the strategies that worked in this class with this kid as I look at their growth over the past 2 years? And this kid was in the 90th percentile this year and the 20th percentile last year. What happened in that classroom? Who does the current teacher need to talk to make sure that we keep that momentum with that kid that's now at the 90th percentile, where we know at some point that they were at the 20th percentile. But the principal, that instructional leadership team, is not sitting trying to figure out which of our kids are where. That they're familiar with that level of data, but they don't have to do that level of work. And so also taking a look at longitudinal data as well. And so thinking about summer programming. We've had summer programming for years, but is it effective? Are we doing it just because it's summer programming and is that what we do as a matter of practice? Or are we doing it because it's the best thing for our kids to help them to move and improve? And so in thinking about that level of analysis as well. And so we might find that this wasn't as effective as we thought. But again, going back to like not just that reflection, what do we need to do better now that this is the beginning of the school year? We have all year to plan to understand and unpack that data to make summer school more effective the next year. And so there are a variety of ways that this team hopefully is contributing to the support of other teams and in addition to that, the schools as well. So of even working with different teams, working with the nursing team, of it could be something as simple as I thought I had to go in this system to access this information. Actually, you can click that button up there and extract that data. Or even, again, I'm just thinking about sometimes people have to combine files. Now we have a system, SPSS, statistical software, that I can analyze all the school's data in 15 minutes as opposed to every principal spending 30 minutes per subject area. So if you think about 30, let's stick with low numbers. 30 minutes across 10 schools is 300 minutes, and I can do that same work in 15 minutes for all 10 schools. And so thinking about how we're operating effectively, efficiently as a district to best service our educators and our students.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Shaw.
Thank you.
So, yes.
Yeah. So how many people, obviously there's a team that is working with you. How many people are, because I would think there's a lot of work inputting this data and there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of work, a lot of hard work, a lot of good work. So
In the last meeting, we introduced interim assistant director of data assessment and accountability, Ms. Julie Ward. She was already in the district, serving as an assistant director of curriculum instruction and math. We have shifted the data center under the team of data assessment and accountability, which consists of 8 people, and really understanding like what their skill sets are. We have people looking at data. There's a skill set there, but that's not necessarily how it's been used, but we could use those skill sets. And so just thinking about like, this is all data. We even look at analyzing enrollment patterns over time, of thinking about, not that we're going to go here, but the D- policy and the impact that it has on students. And so we have the skill set, but we may not have been using people in that way. And so how can we leverage the skill sets that we already have to, again, serve our kids and our educators more efficiently and effectively? So currently, the team consists of 9 plus myself.
Appreciate the effort. Thank you very much.
All right. So let's look at Lynn Public Schools accountability data. So while we do have individual schools within our district that have been identified as in need of targeted assistance or intervention, it's important to note that our overall district classification does not categorize us as a district requiring targeted assistance or intervention. So that's the first thing that I do want to call out. And you can see that in the top left in that first red circle. And the reason for our classification, remember that spectrum that we looked at with the percentages that we do receive as a district, is that we were classified as moderate progress targets. And so on that accountability percentile that I talked about on a 1 to 99 that's available, specifically, we were at 34% for that. And keep in mind that moderate progress towards target is defined as a cumulative score with a range of anybody that falls between 25% and 49% is considered making moderate progress towards your targets. And that's what that visual that we looked at before, and that's where we fall as a district on that spectrum. Again, while as a district we're not designated as a district requiring assistance or intervention, we do have 14 schools requiring assistance or intervention. And we have 10 schools within that spectrum on the left not requiring assistance or intervention. I do want to acknowledge that number adds up to 24, and we have 27 schools. And so again, just going back to that, like Frederick Douglass, they didn't get data, and so we have instances like that where if a school has such a small number that they won't be included. So when we're talking about accountability data, the number is 24. So understanding the weighting for our non-high schools. So again, we have 4 components that we've looked at for non-high schools, which are elementary and middle schools. You have achievement, student growth, English language proficiency, and those additional indicators like chronic absenteeism. And if you are a school with L, your achievement weighting is different if you don't have a student group classified as English language learners. So again, of just that distinction and some of the percentages. And most, if not all of our schools have English language learners that meet that number threshold. So our weightings are 60, 20, 10, 10 for each individual non-high school. So again, this is our actual data for our non-high schools. Again, looking at those 4 indicators, how many points did Lynn Public Schools receive for each of the 4 indicators in non-high schools, our elementary and middle schools? If you look at achievement, we received 0 out of 12 points. But also considering that we also get rated for the low performing students group at this level, the non-high school level. And so for the lowest performing group, we received 5 out of 8 points. In growth, overall, we received 4 out of 8 points on both groups of students. For progress towards English language proficiency, we received 1 out of 4 points. And for those additional indicators, which for the non-elementary school, the non-high school, includes chronic absenteeism, we received 4 out of 4 points. So high school is slightly different in that the non-high school has 4 indicators, high school has 5 indicators. And so that's why you see the percentages are distributed slightly differently. So at the high school level, achievement is at 40%, 20% for growth, 20% for high school completion, English language proficiency is 10%, and the additional indicators are at 10%. And note that in addition to chronic absenteeism, the high school also has the advanced completion rate, which is different from the previous schools. And again, also note that we did not have data this year for the high schools with the lowest performing group. So for achievement at the high school level, we received 2 out of 12 points. Growth, 3 out of 8 points. High school completion, 4 out of 12. And what did we say about the high school completion, that this is based on 2021-22 school year data. So this could potentially change the next time we have this conversation. For progress towards L proficiency at the high school level, 1 out of 4 points. And those additional indicators, which includes chronic absenteeism, advanced coursework, 4 out of 8 points. Coming back to this slide, it's the combination of non-high school and high school where they pull those calculations together of how we landed at that 34% of moderate progress towards our targets. So before we move into the individual subjects, are there any clarifying questions? Okay.
Or do
I'm sorry, yeah. So the high school completion is 4. I understand that will be changing at the end of the summer, but do we have any idea maybe how, I mean, because we probably have data of how many kids took certain courses and things like that. Any guesstimate, I guess you could say, of how that might change or what might happen there?
I do not have any
No,
guesstimate
okay,
for how
fair
it may
enough.
change.
That's all right.
All right. Specifically in MCAS, and so again, we were looking at like the whole framework, right? But now we're going to shift into MCAS. Not a deep dive into every grade level right now, but we will in November when we come back to that full accountability measure, and when all of the data is accurate and updated from the state. So in mathematics, in grades 3 through 10, there was relative little to no change in the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations in mathematics from 2022 to 2023. In English language arts, there was a slight decline in the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations in 3 through 8. And there was a slight increase in 10th grade of the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations in English language arts. In science, in grade 5, scores decreased. While there was a slight increase in grade 8, high schools experienced a more pronounced increase in meeting or exceeding expectations in science with the +6 points. And I do want to call out something. If you flip back through, while we don't have this data in front of us, while it isn't the most optimal, what I do want to call out, that COVID slide has stabilized. And so while we may have declined by 1 point, when we were looking at that COVID data, it was a much bigger slide. And so much like the state, our data is now becoming more stable. So as far as next steps, as we think about what our data looks like and how we plan to support schools, doing some of that data analysis, a lot of data analysis. We're meeting with schools next week, support sessions in looking at setting SMARTY goals and also a fishbone analysis of understanding of how did we get here. What might be the root cause of some of the challenges that we're experiencing, or in some of those pockets where we do have some schools that did get 3 out of 4 points for English language proficiency. How did we do that? And how can we share those practices with other schools? So next week, we're coming together with the instructional leadership teams in 3 different sessions to provide some support on what school improvement planning will look like this year, how to conduct a root cause analysis, and what it means to set SMARTY goals. SMARTY, I think we probably all had heard of SMART, but the SMART-T is the I with inclusivity and an E with equity. We're also going to work on refining what our problem statement is so that we can really clearly define and understand what those root causes are. And we're facilitating data meetings with each of the school teams. One, to make sure that they understand their data, that we have that shared understanding, right, of that they're owning their data. But also, it includes a consultancy protocol where they'll have the opportunity to share out their root cause analysis and to pose a problem of practice, not just with district leadership, but with their peers. And so middle school, while they're presenting their information, they'll also get to hear from another middle school principal asking questions, or did you think about this as well? Again, thinking about that collaboration and how people learn best. And so that is something that we will be doing with schools next month, which is right around the corner. And then we're also thinking about how do we build capacity across the district. Like, I think somebody was like, this team is small. This sounds like a lot of work. It is. But we're also thinking about how do you build that capacity across the district. And so we're going to be working with the secondary program specialists, who are often the data specialists at the high school and middle school level, to use a continuous improvement model called JOS. And then you can expect a presentation of the full detailed by grade with the updated high school information in late October or early November. And that is all I have for you. Do you have a clarifying question, Mr. Pena?
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Shorter. Thank you for the presentation. It's pretty refreshing to see some data with a plan of action. And I'm curious to see when you come back to show us, the data and improvements that we've done. And I like the thought of, PD, especially with the program specialists and other middle schoolers coming in. It's nice to see some uniformity, across the board, and just curious to see how we perform. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shorter, and thank you for your team for putting all this together. So all of this is going on, and our teachers are also, if they haven't already, set in their, student learning goals, the professional goals as well. Will all this tie into their work as well okay, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and so as we are moving towards sharing out the school improvement plan with district goals, and the schools will go back and be able to develop their goals in collaboration with their teams that are aligned to the district goals. And so that's the work that is happening over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for the presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's up. He has it.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. So I'm Dr. Detuya. I'm the Administrator of Special Education. I'm here to present on SPED update and then also TFM. I'm also accompanied by Jess McLaughlin, who's the Deputy Administrator, and also Charlie Gallo, who is a compliance. So they've been here a little bit longer than I have, so in case there are some questions that I might not have the answer to, I'm going to be relying on them for some information. So moving along, again, we're just going to talk about a little snapshot of the SPED information, so that way you can kind of get a better understanding about the department and what we're all about. Then we'll look at some outside placements to look at that information as well, followed by an overview of TFM, which we have a progress report that's due tomorrow, so I'll be working on that with Charlie in the morning. And then just some Q&A, but you're welcome to ask any questions, during the presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. I think you also have copies of the presentation there. You likely also have copies of the TFM action plan, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes. And if there are any questions again on those, just please feel free to let me know. So first of all, just looking at SPED in general, a snapshot currently, and this is data as of August. The data obviously changes daily, but we have about 3,400 students that are on IEPs and that are receiving services. Of those, that represents about 20% of the overall population within Lynn Public Schools. About 2% are service only. So that means those are students that are just receiving services within the district. They may or may not be an actual Lynn student, and they're just receiving like maybe speech services or something like that, within the district. Then we have about 59% of the students are receiving their IEPs in full inclusion. We'll talk in a few minutes too about the different type of placement settings. And then partial inclusion are about 5%, substantially separate is 28%, and then for students that are in outside placements are 3%. And there's a separate slide to talk about those in a few minutes. So when we talk about our IEP compliance rate, and this is also, I really appreciate how Dr. Shorter talked about it, and I even mentioned it when I had my original interviews. All this data is public information, so it's pretty easy to get online. Sometimes you have to dig through different, levels of information, but the point is that it's really important to be able to see that, because those, and especially continue to monitor that data over time, because those are indicators, obviously, of where we're headed, and then we can make changes. So when we look at our IEP compliance rate, we're at about 68% compliant. So that means within the timelines that are mandated by regulation. So we have a few that have been rejected, some of which the consent hasn't been signed. So meaning when a caregiver wants to begin the process, they'll request for an evaluation. The district then is required to provide a documentation to them to be able to sign that they, consent to it. So when we've sent it out and the consent hasn't been signed, that puts us out of compliance. So that to me is just a clear indicator that, and a lot of times this happens over the summer too, because somebody had put out, a request, and then, the summer happened and people aren't working and it gets picked up later. But the point is that we can certainly figure out ways to be able to contact caregivers and figure out how we can reduce that particular number. And then the last one are the ones that are overdue. So typically that's, let's say, the meeting hasn't occurred within the time frame, or maybe the meeting has occurred, but the IEP itself hasn't been written. So again, those are other areas of opportunity that we can look at. So hopefully when we have the next update, we're going to see a little bit of changes in those particular numbers. So moving on, this just gives you a snapshot of the different categories that we have for individuals that qualify for special education. There's also a link at the bottom of the page that you're welcome to visit. Again, that's on DESE's website, and it gives you those definitions if you want to drill down a little bit more into what each one of those means. But it just shows that we have a broad variety of different categories for students for the types of disabilities that we're supporting them in within the educational environment. So I talked a moment about the different settings. So what I wanted to do was give you a little bit more information in case you're not already aware. Inclusion is the way that the district is moving. And I have to say that I'm really impressed with Lynn, because there are a lot of inclusion programs that we have in inclusion seats. And inclusion just means that, and that's the goal that we want to try to get to be able to provide those services to students with general education, so they're not being ostracized, not being pulled out. They're getting that in an inclusion setting, included with their other like peers. That's one of the settings. Resources, the kind of like the historical pull-out service where a student leaves the classroom, and sometimes the issue with that is that they're losing out on instructional time. So if you think about it, even back to when we were all in elementary school, you'd see the resource teacher pick up a couple of students, then you go to another classroom, pick up some more, go to another, pick up some more, and they march into some room somewhere. They're losing out on instructional time. So inclusion is really the way that we want to be able to go, to be able to help provide those services in the classroom. And frankly, when that's happening, the teacher who's providing those inclusion services can even pick up some of the other students that might be having difficulty, which helps us when we talk about Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions within the MTSS model. And then the final one is self-contained or substantially separate. So those are students that require a much higher level of support. So they receive all of their services, or nearly all, within a self-contained classroom, which is separate. So you tend to find that, like in, let's say, in some behavior programs, but also in some life skills programs, where the need that they have is so specific that therefore they're receiving that all in a substantially separate environment. And then I just have on there a number of different specialized programs that we have within LPS. So when you think about the previous slide and the different categories of disability, based upon those disabilities, they might be receiving services in one of those programs that are scattered in different buildings throughout the district. So outside placements, I think the most important thing to think about is not necessarily the number or even the cost of what we're paying, but it's that they are Lynn students. So they're entitled to be able to be they're part of the community. They're entitled to be able to be integrated and access the different programs that we have. But the reality is that based upon the type of services that they require, and the inability to be able to find that particular programming within the district, we end up looking for outside placements. And usually what happens is that it's so specialized that we may not have a program for it, and the most effective option is moving into an out-of-district placement. But the reality is that it ends up costing a lot of money. The student is being using transportation, is now moving somewhere outside of the district, so it pulls them away from the daily interactions of what's going on in the community. And then what happens is that over time, we start to find that we have a lot of students that are going to a particular program, and that's really a signal for us to be able to figure out how can we create that programming within the district so we can bring those kids back in, and then they can be, again, more integrated within the school population. And this number also changes over time. We might find that some students graduate out, some students come back in the district, some students go, into an out-of-district placement. Sometimes we have students that move in from a different district that were already in out-of-district placement, and they continue in that placement. And that's where you have, if you've heard of fiscal responsibility and programmatic responsibility, typically if a student comes from a different district, they move into our district, we end up being programmatically responsible, but the other district remains fiscally responsible, just depending upon when it happens. But the point is that, so the number ends up changing. And that's why you see that there are 8 students that we are fiscally responsible for, because they left our district, went elsewhere, we retain the fiscal responsibility, even though we're not responsible for the programming. So in fiscal year 23, we spent approximately $14 million on outside placements. And when you break that down based upon the students, that's approximately $122,000 per student. When you compare that to data on DESE around how much we're paying per student, we're spending about $16,000 per student for education. So, and again, for some students, it might be that is the most effective placement for them to be. And what we want to make sure is that we're providing the right type of service in the right type of setting. But again, as I mentioned before, we might find that we have a number of students which we might be able to bring back into the district to provide that programming, which is something that we're going to look on over time. And that takes time, right? Because, we want to make sure that we have the programming that's there, we have the buy-in from the caregivers, we have the IEP meetings, and that we have collaboration in those discussions. So what I put on there is something called circuit breaker, which individuals may or may not be familiar with. Sometimes people say, well, yeah, we spend $14 million, but circuit breaker pays us back. And the reality is that circuit breaker is a way for districts to be reimbursed for these types of expenses. But I put a note on there. It's really just 75% of qualifying expenses over a certain threshold. So the reality is that out of that $14 million that we spent, we only had $4 million that was reimbursed. So it still ends up being a very cost heavy, way of providing education. So it's a way for us to, again, to sort of figure out ways that we can do it much more effectively and also in an integrated way so that the students can be more integrated with the community. So the next part is about TFM, and I think you have there a copy too of the action plan. So tiered focus monitoring is just a way that districts and schools are able to be held accountable for what they do. So what happens is that every 3 years, DESE, and I'll talk about it in a minute, there are these different categories or groups of indicators that they're looking at. And it's really tied to student outcomes, and they're in the area of special ed and also compliance, which are very integrated, between the two. And what happens sometimes is that they could lead to corrective action, which is why we have that particular action plan. And what I was mentioning earlier is that we can use a lot of these data points if we continue to take data over time to be able to help indicate where we need to go. So that way we end up avoiding getting into a situation where we have an action plan because we're being proactive rather than reactive. So tiered focus monitoring, as I mentioned, has these 2 different groups, one of which is more special ed focused, one of which is civil rights focused, but they're really not 2 mutually exclusive categories. They're really integrated. It's just that there are so many indicators that DESE is looking at that they break it out into 2 different categories. And what you have on the right-hand side is just kind of like a wheel, right? Which is indicating that cycle, that it starts out with a self-assessment where the districts assess themselves, provide that data into DESE, then it comes up with a report, and then based upon those outcomes, the district might be indicated that they have to create an action plan because there are certain areas that they might have been low in. So, and that's where we see in this particular slide. So when we look at the different indicators, out of all of those indicators, and there are a lot, actually Lynn did pretty well, because there were only two particular areas, CR3 and CR10C, which I'll go into a minute, which are the areas that we were cited for, that we then had to create an action plan. But the reality is that of all of those, it was just those particular two. And then when we drill down a bit more and we talk about CR3, that's access to full range of educational programs. So that means, and you can also see it in the data, where we unfortunately have a higher number of students that are receiving services in more substantially separate settings or in less inclusive settings than what the state requires or prefers. So therefore, they're saying that we're just not providing sufficient access to students across those range of educational programs. So what I have on there is just an overview of what the action plan is. So what you have in the document that was provided to you, I just put it into kind of a way that my brain can understand it, and hopefully it makes it a little bit more palatable for everybody on the committee. But basically, there are these different planned dates or these deliverable dates, but they're really not hard and fast dates. What I have at the bottom is the expected date of completion. And the one thing that I wanted to mention on here is that the ones that have an asterisk are the ones that have that expected completion date at the end. The ones that don't have an asterisk are the ones that DESE is looking for us to provide some type of update on, or some type of an artifact or example when we do our progress reports. And our progress reports happen at different times of the year. As I mentioned, there's one tomorrow. I have another slide that talks about those dates. But it's all integrated, right? Because we're all working towards something, with the final goal being the inclusion task force that comes on next year. So the thing I wanted to mention about the dates is that although they're there, the reality is, like, for example, there's a training component that we have here, which is due in November. But when you look at CR10C, which is student discipline, there's a training deliverable that is in September. It's actually going to happen in November, but that's okay, because DESE realizes that there needs to be flexibility around what happens within districts. We've combined those two particular trainings into, well, we're thinking about combining them into one, or at least having them in a similar day when we have our PD. So DESE knows that for these things to happen, they have to make sure that they provide that flexibility so that it makes sense for the districts, rather than keeping them to hard, fast dates. But every time that we have one of the action plan deadlines, we then need to tell them where we are in relation to those and what's going to come up next. And that just gives you the different action plan report dates. So we had already submitted one, obviously, for 10C, which was back in August. There's one coming up tomorrow for both CR3 and CR10C. Charlie and I are working on that tomorrow. Then we have a couple more that come up, with the final ones coming up in February. But if you notice, that's when the final action, or the final progress update is done, but we still have deliverables that happen after that, because the process needs to continue. And then at the end, DESE looks at it again to see how we're doing, and then indicates whether we're done or if we need some additional remediation. So that concludes kind of the update on SPED, also on TFM. Does anybody have any particular questions that we can help to answer? Yep.
Member Castellanos and Member Dugan.
Thank you for your presentation. My first questions are going to come around the SPED snapshot. I have a question around the overdue percent, the 9.13% of overdue IEPs. What would, anyone in the room, what would be the number of students there if we...
Oh, if we do the math, so
Yeah.
3,000 something, maybe like about 300?
Okay. So why and what factors lead to this? What's the components to, I guess, the factors of overdue, like IEPs? What's leading to that?
Yeah, I think part of it is during the summer. A lot of times, once the school year hits back again, there's just been kind of, there's been a little break, within the time. So, and then things pick up. So my expectation is that the next time that I present on them, we're going to see some change in those numbers. But also sometimes it's, let's say, getting the IEP signed. So IEP ends up going home. It might not get signed. Chair people are obviously very busy in what they're doing. They're trying to track it down. Caregiver might say, oh yeah, I sent that in, but it doesn't happen, or it's stuck in the mail. There's a lot of different, reasons why, and some of them are just not like, they're more kind of anecdotal in a sense, but the reality is that, we're still held accountable because it's not due in that particular time. I think there's some ways that we can have some system improvements around that, like if there's ways that we can do electronic signing, that's one way to get to individuals quicker. Sometimes too, the translation time might take a little bit of time, so that ends up, adding into the delay as well, because, somebody shouldn't be signing something that's not in the language that, that they're comfortable with, and it takes time to translate those as well. So my point is that there's lots of different reasons, but I think when we present on it again next time, it's going to be, much less.
Well, I was going to ask the consent, not like the 22.13%, like I could see the strategy behind that and
Right.
trying to get that percent lowered. I appreciate that. My next question is around outside placements. This might be a question for compliance. Could you explain through your the compliance perspective around how the journey ends up out of a student, how we end up out of district, and kind of discuss some of the mandates and some of the guidelines that we have to follow?
Happy to join Dr. Petruia. Thank you. So essentially through the IEP process, that would be a determination of the team. And so it may be that the Lynn Public Schools members of the IEP team have identified that the student needs something individually that are beyond what the district has a program to provide. It also may be that a parent or advocate may be looking for that particular outside placement. And so there, through that IEP process, individually per student, there would be a determination that placement would be determined on the IEP for some placement that doesn't exist within the district. That would be a broad overview. I'm happy to defer to Dr. Tuya as well if there's anything to add.
That's perfect, yeah.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
and I think always, and what I've, in any district, and I've discovered it here in Lynn as well, what am I trying to say? The goal, right, is always to be able to try to find that particular programming within the district. But the reality is everybody's different. And it's hard to be able to take that uniqueness and then try to fit it into a program that's, kind of designed to be for a particular profile. Not everybody fits that. So you're going to have that situation where you end up having a program or a student that's just not going to be able to be serviced by that type of programming. So you're going to look for something that's outside. But then, again, as I mentioned, sometimes what happens is that you have one student that goes here, then eventually it grows over time and you find, wow, we have like 5 or 10 students in the same type of program. Why don't we build it here? And without continually tracking that, that growth ends up happening. And then the second part, I think, that ends up happening too is that, as Charlie had mentioned, sometimes, or rather, sometimes the student might have come from a different district and then they were already in that particular in that placement. And there might have been some involvement from, an advocate or an attorney or whatever, and they want to keep them there. And then it ends up being a challenge to be able to, people get comfortable. To be able to gain that trust and then be able to help individuals see that, well, we have this programming here, and again, you would have to have an IEP meeting to be able to change that placement from wherever they are to something within the district. So it ends up being a bit more complex and a bit more nuanced, but that just kind of gives you a little bit of understanding about, how we end up getting to that particular point. But I do know, and especially I think Charlie can speak about it too, Lynn has what's called the BOP process. That's just for students that, let's say, if there's an emotional impairment or some type of an emotional concern, and the BOP process is one that really helps to look at FBAs, have the appropriate assessments been done, what are the different interventions that have been approached, to ensure that we're not just randomly sending somebody out of the district or to some other type of placement, that even within district we use it, but that making sure that we're going through an actual, systematic process to make sure that we're making the right type of decision.
I appreciate that. So what's I guess this might be for Dr. Shorter for later on. So what is the baseline or compared margins that we should be aiming for? I don't know, are we working to reduce outside placements? Are we looking to build out programming? What are some of the, maybe, because I look at the cost, it's expensive and we don't really get reimbursed much. If I look at $4 million, that's not a lot. So it's expensive. So what are we doing? you know,
That's
what are,
Can,
yeah,
sped.
okay.
Can I-
yeah.
One of the next steps is facilitating a root cause.
Could you come up and speak? Sorry, you gotta go in the mic. Apologize. Sorry.
So while it does sound like ideally, I think to Dr. Dotui's point of that we want to spend less money, but at the end of the day, if it costs more money to best service our kids, that's what we want to do. But at the same time, understanding what is the root cause is we're also doing that work with schools. We're also partnering with teams to do that work as well and to understand how can we, again, be more efficient. What are the real challenges that we're experiencing when we uncover things like 22%? Of the challenge is about getting signatures, and where is that actually happening, or what is that real issue? Is the real fix electronic? But again, being able to dig a little deeper into the data and understand those things. But a next step in this partnership with the special education team is to conduct a root cause analysis so that we're not jumping to conclusions or making assumptions about what the challenges are.
Do you mind? I just want to give an example of, I want to give a shout out actually to the special ed department because we have a few examples of how we brought kids back from outside placements. Coach program, teams, life skills, our hearing impaired, Fresh Start. Like all of those kids in the past were in outside placements. And so the special education department did do an analysis, looked at cost, looked at what can we do, and developed those programs, and now we have them in-house. And so we need to look and analyze the other students who are in outside placements and do the same thing and see, can we bring them back?
I think we had Member Dugan, Member Payette, Member Campola.
Thank you for the report. I love that we're moving toward inclusion. I think all the data, and the research is pointing toward, that's just being healthier for students, social, emotionally, academically, getting their tiered supports in the classroom is definitely the way to go. My one question would be, that is a change, right? And having our special ed teachers push in rather than pull out is a change. So what are we gonna do? Are we working in time for teachers to adjust to that, planning time, all those things need to happen to make sure we're doing that effectively. So could you talk a little bit about how that's all gonna kind of play into this?
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, now I've broken it. I think that that has already been, it is already happening.
Okay.
So, and I think it's really looking at, and part of it is PD, part of it is hiring. I know Jess has been working really hard at filling a lot of the open roles that we have, not only in the SPED department, but even helping out the schools to be able to fill those roles. And we're having an unprecedented shortage around teachers, which makes it really challenging. So then when we start to build these programs or build out these classrooms, it's hard to staff them, which then becomes a whole other issue. But I think it's really, to answer your question, in terms of PD, hiring the right staff, to be able to fill those and then be able to find more opportunities. But that really is something that Lynn has been doing and I think is really on the vanguard of, inclusion settings. And that's why you see the number in that particular way. In other districts, you really don't find that. They're really relying more on a pull-out model than on inclusion.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then one other question. Talk a little bit about you mentioned the Inclusion Task Force coming soon. Could you kind of talk a little bit about that, what the thoughts are for that, and what that will look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to make a joke and say that's May, so I'll talk about it later, but no.
Coming soon, like I said, yeah.
But that's what we're building up to, and what the Inclusion Task Force is going to be is just members from across different parts of the district to be able to. Well, let me take a step back. In fact, let me go to the slide. So when now it's gone. All right. So as Dr. Shorter was mentioning, we're partnering together, data and SPED, to be able to conduct a root cause analysis. I actually reached out to Dr. Shorter because she introduced the executive committee reintroduced to Fishbone. A lot of people were familiar with it, but she's really phenomenal at being able to help individuals and groups be able to do that work. So the point is that root cause analysis is going to be conducted by a cross-functional team across the district. That will then lead to an analysis or report about what our findings are. Then that plus training is then going to lead to that inclusion task force, which is going to help to keep the work or to keep it going. So that once we finish this action plan, it just doesn't stop. It just keeps going.
So those people would be in-house. Those aren't,
No.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Member Pena.
My question was answered.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Good work.
And- I think, Charlie, want to say?
And I just wanted to add to that question. I think what the Lynn Public Schools and special education does a really good job with now is respecting that principle of least restrictive. And so prior to a student being recommended for an outsourced placement, there is a process. We have an abbreviation or acronym for it, and we're making sure that we're respecting that principle. We're making sure also that we're considering different subgroups of students. Being represented equitably, but certainly I think after the outside placement is made, the opportunity exists to, as Ruggiero said, to try to bring them back.
Great, thank you. Member Capola and then Member Magnolia.
Okay, on the question of the, when a student moves into our area, we have some that eight additional, or 8 fiscal, we're responsible for the fiscal. Do we have any in the reverse, like we're responsible for the program, but not the fiscal?
Yes. I don't know what the number of is off the top of my head, but yes, there are a few. So,
Okay, few, all right. And in reading the tiered focus report, the monitoring report, it talks about the eligible students 3 to 5, and we're at 50%. And I'm wondering, is the problem a space issue?
partly it's really like a denominator issue, if you think about it. So like, since we don't have universal pre-K, the population that's being served, it tends to be more focused or skewed towards special education rather than, you know, the larger group. So that then presents a challenge, right, in terms of figuring out how are we going to structure these particular classrooms so that that number can be brought down. And in terms of the space is frequently ends up being a concern. I know even just the other day, Leanne Palmer, who's one of the ADs who oversees the pre-K programs, she's a very strong advocate about trying to find space, trying to plan, you know, trying to make sure that we're forecasting, you know, for where things are getting in the future. So I think it's multiple kind of factors at play.
You know, because we weren't really cited for it, but they brought attention to that. So is there any leeway on that for them understanding our space situation? Of how we can't really get it down if we don't have the space?
Were you about to say something, Earl? Okay, yeah. So I think I hesitate to say yes, because I wasn't here when the review was conducted, but typically my understanding is that we report the information, then DESE ends up looking at that and we have the ability to be able to respond. And then when we respond, that's where we can clarify things, because sometimes the data looks a particular way, but it's important to be able to understand, you know, further beyond the numbers to see where they're actually coming from. So I believe so, yes, but I wasn't part of that process, you know, when it happened here.
I think to Ms. Capola, that is a really good observation, and the reason why we weren't cited for it as opposed to brought attention was because of those walkthroughs. And prior to Dr. Datuya, Jess and I did those walkthroughs with DESE, and so the space issues were apparent. At one particular school, which I won't name, the DESE representative said, everything looks great with one exception. And I said, what is that? And they said, there's not an elevator. And so we're not, of course, cited for that, but, just to give an example why some things may be pointed out but not cited, as you read well.
Great.
Yeah, and just to chime in there, because it's a great point, and the explanation makes sense. It's also, from a bigger picture perspective, that's obviously something we've been looking to address, and we've been able to systematically be adding space and adding classrooms and adding seats to both be able to create the programming that we're required to for these students we're talking about here, and also the bigger picture goal of wanting more of our students to have access to pre-K education. So, yeah. Member Magnolia.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Out of curiosity, what percentage of SPED vacancies are there with staffing? You mentioned that there were some national shortage issues, et cetera. If you know, like, do we have a 10% vacancy rate of positions we're trying to still fill? Is it tiny? Is it terrifyingly large? Just tell me a little bit about the staffing issues.
I'm going to ask, I'm going to give a response, and then I'm going to also ask Jess if she might have a bit more information. But just to kind of like put it into context, in the special education department, we're responsible for staffing related service providers. So we have more influence over that. And that's about 130 positions maybe. And out of that, I think there's maybe around 10 or so that are vacant. And I look to her because Jess is managing the staffing area, but she does keep an updated, sheet that has all that information that I look at periodically. So I'm trying to visualize it in my head, how many empty spaces are there. But when it comes to the actual the teachers within the buildings, that's not something that we have direct purview over. So I don't have a number, and that's where I'm thinking maybe Jess has a kind of a guesstimate around that. But she does help the buildings whenever they're asking for support or help, because she has a greater purview in terms of being able to sort of see things but again, we're not directly involved in that. Do you have any thought about district-wide, how many vacancies we might have in that area?
I'd hate to guess, but I would roughly say between 10 and 15 between the elementary to the high school level. Yeah. Of our main, we need more inclusion teachers. And between that and speech, are keeping me busy trying to find people, and it's really difficult. So it's a challenge, but we getting there. Day by day, we're hiring, as much as we can, and we're getting, closer. And when we get somebody hired, we're having a celebration. It's a lot, but I think that we're going to continue to search and reach out to colleges and have, we're working with the HR department as well and advertising, word of mouth. I ask everybody I hire if they have any friends or family that are looking to work in education as well. And I've gotten some leads that way from our new hires, bringing people from their previous job sites to come work in Lynn. So it's a little bit of poaching, but we do what we got to do. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and I will say too, Jess works not only incredibly hard, but hard in the staffing area as well. And it is really difficult because sometimes too, I think we've had the experience where somebody starts or is scheduled to start and they don't because they go somewhere else. It's just very competitive, which then ends up being very disheartening because you're sort of making these plans and all of a sudden you have to shift. So sometimes that happens too, where we're shifting people around to be able to cover to make sure that students are receiving their services.
It is something that we're hearing from all the districts as well. Yeah. In the out-of-district placements, everybody's struggling to find.
Go ahead,
I just want to share, Member Magnolia, that overall, as of today, Human Resources we get biweekly updates. And I mean twice a week, not every other week. We are at 81 teacher vacancies overall across the district. So if Jess is looking at, 15 to 20, that's still a relatively small percentage of the 1,495 total teachers that we have. So we're almost at 95% total staffing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just wondering about, on the special ed teachers, what's the percentage of certified?
So total numbers, we can definitely get you a breakdown of the total SPED certified, and those, of course, I think it's important which ones are also emergency certified, because we have both, and we're working, to develop professional development to address those needs as well.
I'll actually tag on to that. Deb Morrell, who works in our curriculum department for educator quality, actually just had a session yesterday or the day before with a number of special education teachers who are on waivers to work on them getting their license. So we have an active plan. Deb's working really hard. I know there's special ed department people that are working with her on that. We have staff who are mentoring these teachers and working with them. So there is a plan of action on the teachers who are on waivers to get them licensed.
Very good.
Thank you so much for the
Thank
presentation.
you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. Next item is a request to accept a donation from the Lynn Rotary Club of a buddy bench to Fallon Elementary School. It's a recommendation of the superintendent.
Yes, it is. Very excited about this one.
Great. It's the will of the committee.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Field trip request from classical basketball team to Orlando from Thursday, December 14th to Monday, December 18th. It's a recommendation of the superintendent.
I am asking this be tabled to the October 12th meeting. We are still missing some field trip documentation, but we anticipate having all of the documents in order before the next school committee meeting.
Make a motion to table.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. We received a request to cancel the 15th regular meeting on October 26th because of a community event at the same time, and are bringing that to the committee.
I'll make a motion to cancel the 15th regular meeting scheduled for October 26, 2023.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Ratification of votes taken in the Building and Grounds Subcommittee meeting. Member Castellanos.
Mayor Nicholson, yes, we had a vote to allow Lynn Community Health Center to utilize space at Pickering Middle School. It was a motion to put it to the full committee. I believe open up the floor for discussion.
Second? Make a second on your motion.
Yep, second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Castellanos?
Yes.
Member Capola?
Yes.
Member Dugan?
Yes.
Member Gately? Absent. Member Magnolia?
Yes.
Member Pena?
Yes.
Mayor Nicholson?
Yes. And that takes us to the superintendent's report.
And I know you're all thrilled and excited to hear what I have to say this evening. So as we approach the end of the first month of school, we emphasize the focus of the coherence framework. And we take great pride in the concerted efforts and commitment to accelerate student learning. This commitment is central to our educational approach with a steadfast focus on grade level instruction, ensuring that every precious minute in classrooms count. We celebrate and cultivate learning environments with high expectations where students and educators are encouraged to strive for excellence. Our collective focus remains squarely on teaching and learning in our journey as a community of learners. As we zero in on the goals of the professional learning communities and instructional leadership teams, our primary emphasis is on mastering English language development standards. We're so excited about this work, and that's across all content areas, thereby supporting our English language learners in their academic pursuits. This targeted approach aligns with the research on effective instructional practices and the importance of pedagogical shifts towards student-centered learning, as evidenced and cited by scholars like Dr. John Hattie, who's an education researcher. Furthermore, with the recently released MCAS 2023 results, we have valuable insight and data that will empower us to enhance our instructional strategies for all schools. We want to recognize and celebrate all our students' success and commend Lynn Woods for ranking among the 66 schools recognized by DESE as a school of recognition.
Nice.
We are committed to a culture of rigorous data use, data literacy, and evidence-based decision-making. We will use data in this pursuit. We have forged a strategic partnership with the Harvard Graduate School of Education Strategic Data Project, which will provide us with expert guidance and mentorship. This partnership will leverage transformative data initiatives to advance critical educational objectives as we eagerly anticipate receiving action-oriented insights that will inform our policies and practices. This network allows for exchanging best practices, rigorous research findings, statistical methodologies, and innovative ideas. Together, we approach the complex, multi-year work of improving education with a commitment to excellence and a shared vision of a brighter future for our students and community. Our new partnership with the Harvard Graduate School of Education Strategic Data Project is a testament to our dedication to data-driven decision-making by working closely with renowned faculty, mentors, and Dr. Tom Kane from the Center for Research at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. We're tapping into their expertise and benefiting from their guidance in leveraging data to drive meaningful change. The transformative data projects we undertake will catalyze improvements in various facets of our educational system, from curriculum development to teacher professional development. Our commitment to fostering an inclusive and culturally responsive educational environment remains resolute, recognizing that diversity is our strength, and we will be consistent, curious, optimistic, celebrating small and big wins. In closing, during this month of celebration, Hispanic Heritage Month, we take a moment to honor and recognize the invaluable contributions of our diverse community. We appreciate all students, staff, teachers, and administrators bringing unique perspectives and linguistic richness to our schools. As a Latina, I take great pride in representing this community and the students and staff who identify as Hispanic. Justice Sonia Sotomayor from our Supreme Court stated that Latina in me is an ember that blazes forever. Her words are moving and true to me. All of us, whether we identify as white or as Black, Indigenous, persons of color, have a responsibility to use the power of our voice to make changes that improve the quality of life for others and open doors of opportunities for their families. This is how we thread ourselves into the American dream. I stand on the shoulder of giants with role models to thank who shaped my life, and I also hope to be an example for our students of how a non-English speaking first-generation American can pursue college and the career of their dreams. I sincerely hope that the embers and passion for improving student achievement are contagious and help inspire others. We can and we will have all students succeed in Lynn. The future of Lynn is brilliant. El futuro de Lynn es brillante.
Thank you.
See no further business?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it.